The first thing I saw when my truck crested that last bend was a row of cabins, 20 or so of them lined up like bad teeth along the ridge where my family used to cut firewood and tell stories. A plywood sign said Cedar Hollow in cheap paint, and a man in a uniform I'd never seen before stood with his hands on his hips at the gate, like he owned the horizon. I blinked, because for a second my brain wouldn't admit the place was the same. Then the man stepped forward and said, flat as a mailbox, "Property's closed, sir. You'll need permission." I held the steering wheel and felt something old in me tighten, like a string pulled on a fiddle I hadn't played in years. My name is Ethan Calder, and Cedar Hollow was my grandmother's land, 60 acres of pines and a creek where we learned to skip stones. People around town knew the Calder place. It had a porch with a sagging swing and a sign nailed to a pine that read Calder Land Family since 1949. That's the thing about land. It holds your history like a photograph you can walk on. So when a stranger told me I couldn't go home, I didn't just feel annoyed, I felt robbed. Marlene Cross was the woman behind the cabins. She showed up 2 days later in a pair of sunglasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Business is business," she said, practically reciting it like a mantra, and handed me a printed deed with a stamp that looked official enough if you weren't born into the mud and memories of the place. "Everything's in order, Mr. Calder. We bought it fair and square." She sounded sincere. She sounded practiced. I looked at her and thought about my grandmother's laugh, the way she hammered nails into the deck with a rhythm like a song. "You didn't," I said. "That's Act 1 conflict in 3 sentences. The rest is how you claw back what's yours." I didn't storm off. You don't with things that matter, you gather. I went to the county recorder's office with a legal pad and a face that would not leave. I learned the tricks. Forged signatures look real to someone who hasn't seen the handwriting 1,000 times. Notary stamps can be bought on the right side of town, and paperwork filed after a funeral can be sold as a clean transaction if you slap enough paperwork on it. Rosa Vega, the attorney I found through a friend, became the person who could read the paper while I pointed at the places that smelled wrong. She squinted at the deed, tapped the ink, and said, "This was filed too fast and too neat. They wanted a chain of title with no loose ends." That's lawyer talk for they stitched a lie. The second act is when you stop asking and start doing. We started digging. Rosa dug into notary logs and found an oddity, a stamp that had been used dozens of times across several counties, the same stamp that marked the deed for Cedar Hollow. The notary turned out to be a freelance stamp broker with shaky records. The survey maps were off. A strip of land that had always been common meadows suddenly had a new line down the middle. An appraiser we hired, Ben Hawthorne, walked the boundary with me and muttered, "This is someone wanting a shortcut, Ethan. They buy confusion, they sell certainty." Marlene didn't just take land, she built a story around it. She called it curated rentals, a community experience, and filled it with strangers who left sunburned footprints and trash on our paths. She hired people to enforce her version of reality. When we tried to bring the issue to the sheriff, he shrugged. "Civil matter," he said, which is a polite way of saying, "Come back with more." So we did. We found a small army of paper soldier shell companies, quick wire transfers, a notary who couldn't remember signing anything. Rosa's voice on the phone had a different timbre than sharper, like someone who sees the chessboard and the next 5 moves. We recorded conversations, we followed leads, we sat in parking lots across town like bad detectives in cheap coffee shops. We put together a file so thick it made my hands ache. Then the storm hit. It wasn't the kind of weather you see in a forecast. It was a kind of panic you feel in your bones. A winter storm rolled in overnight, ice building on the eaves, wind tearing at signs. Cabin 7 called at 2 in the morning, voice frantic, a baby crying in the background, and a smell that made your throat close up when I heard the word gas. The manager on duty said the tank was leaking. They'd called Marlene. Marlene told them to seal the doors and wait for engineers. No one was coming fast enough. I drove like someone who'd finally stopped bargaining with fate. The ridge was a white blur. I could see nothing but the dark shapes of trees until the headlights carved out a tear in the night and the cabins emerged, one by one, like small, vulnerable teeth. There was a smell sharp, metallic, and the kids' wail turned my stomach. I got out and my boots sunk into drifts, and even then, with the world reduced to cold and breath, I thought of my grandmother on that porch, humming and watching storms like they were visitors. I found the source, a ruptured valve on an old storage tank someone had bolted in the back. The manager froze. The family in cabin 7 were already half out the door, wrapped in blankets. I crawled under a leaking pipe in a sweater that shouldn't have been that useful and turned a wrench until the valve kissed shut. The baby stopped crying, and the mother leaned on my shoulder and said, "Thank you." That quiet held more weight than any courtroom drama. They were alive because someone with a stake in the land refused to look away. That was the pivot. Me reasons deepened. It wasn't just about a deed anymore. It was about exposing a system that prioritized profit over people. When I played back Marlene's recorded voicemail, her voice crisp, offering a payoff if I'd sign a quitclaim, I remember the room going very still. She said, "$500,000, Ethan. Walk away and never mention this again." You can hear confidence like a coin clinking on a table. I kept the voicemail. Rosa smiled and said, "We just bought leverage. We built the case like carpenters building a bridge." Ben found that the surveyor who'd redrawn the boundary had been paid through another company that didn't actually exist. A forensic accountant traced funds through shell accounts in 3 states typical, the accountant said, and that was never supposed to be music to anyone's ears. We brought in the county inspector, who put red tags on the cabins for code violations: no septic permits, electrical work done by unlicensed hands, decks that swayed when you sat on them. The press smelled a story and came, bright-eyed and hungry, and suddenly Cedar Hollow wasn't just my problem. It was the town's problem. Marlene fought back. She sued us for harassment, called me bitter, and staged a town hall where she wore a dress the color of a thread and told everyone she was creating jobs. She had a talking point for every wound. In the meeting, she leaned across a lectern and said, "People like you romanticize the past, Ethan. This is progress." I said, "Progress doesn't smell like gas, and it doesn't leave people out in a storm." The audience laughed, but the lines in her face didn't crack. Act 3 is the courtroom. It's where the truth gets a lawyer and the lie has to show its papers. We presented the notary records, the forensics, the recorded bribe. The judge watched like a man weighing coins. Rosa spoke in a quiet, slow voice that made the whole room listen. She played Marlene's voicemail and then laid out the chain of shell companies like a string of ugly pearls. The prosecutor, Claire Ortiz, announced criminal charges: fraud, forgery, bribery. You could hear names on the paper like final blows. Marlene sat in the gallery like she'd been expecting this turn. When the bailiff let her out, she looked at me, and there was no show of surprise, only the same practiced smile. "You'll watch how quickly things change," she told me from across the room, and somehow it sounded like a promise. The judge nodded the verdicts into the air, and the gavels fell. It felt justice-like, and also not enough. You can convict a person and still not mend the creek or grow back the pines. After the verdict, restitution paid for demolition of the most dangerous cabins, and funds were set aside for environmental remediation. The county restored the original parcels, and the title awkwardly, legally slid back toward what it had been. We set up a trust to maintain the land and to keep it from being gobbled up again. People rebuilt fences, planted saplings, and we held a small ceremony where a few sticky-handed kids helped hammer a new sign. Calderland remembered. It was quiet and right, and I kept thinking about the woman in cabin 7 who'd cried in my shoulder and said, "You came." That simple thing, more than any legal line, felt like the truth. But here's where I stop pretending the story is neat. The ridge is quieter, yes, but the conversation didn't end. People around town still disagree. Some say the cabins brought much-needed tourists, jobs, money. Others say no price is worth losing what you grew up on. Marlene's trial didn't fix every crooked mind, and there are still people who call me stubborn or nostalgic. I'm okay with that. I'd rather be stubborn than be the sort of person who lets the past be sold piece by piece. So I'm asking you, because this is where you come in, what would you have done? Was I right to record the voicemail? Was it enough to fight the way we fought? Tell me below, is justice about the law, or is it about the people who breathe the air and live on the land? Share the side you take. Are you Team Progress or Team Preserve? Which matters more, where you live and why? If you grew up somewhere with roots like mine, tell me a memory that still smells like your childhood: the creek, the porch, the swing. If this story made you think of something else, I want to hear it. And if you liked hearing how Cedar Hollow came back, well, share this with someone who believes land is more than an asset. If there's one thing I learned, it's this: property lines on a map don't hold a heart. People hold a heart. Defend that, and you'll know what to do when the next storm comes.